Is it time for questions?
Sure.
Okay. Okay.
Looks like.
So I wanted to come to when Khenpo Rinpoche does refuge. I wanted to come to support the people who are newly taking, as a Dharma sister, kind of like at a wedding, you witness and support. And then I wanted to retake refuge myself with him. But then I noticed it's coupled with the Tara empowerment, and I would like to know if you know what Khenpo Rinpoche's expectations are, because I don't wish to take the Tara empowerment under like false pretense.
What false pretense?
That in the foreseeable future, I'm probably not going to be practicing it.
Oh, I
And
see.
I do know that there's just blessings that come
I see.
from, and that I do have the empowerment if I want to do it in the future. But I didn't want to, that's what I meant by false pretense.
I see.
But I don't know his expectations.
Well, you were talking about refuge.
Yes,
Oh,
I'm
sorry.
going for the refuge, but I was wondering if I need to leave before the empowerment.
Oh, I see. Normally, technically, refuge is separate from the empowerment. Like you could take refuge and not do the empowerment. But that's just the normal. So aside from the normal, sometimes the refuge ceremony and the empowerment kind of run together. And sometimes, once you get the empowerment, at the time of the empowerment, sometimes there's a stated commitment to be met of certain number of mantra recitations or practices and so on. So if you don't want to do that, you could just not take it, or you could ask him in advance if it would be okay if you just went for the refuge and not for the Tara empowerment. And like you might say that you didn't feel like you had enough time to add another commitment. Sometimes the situation is like that. And so it's kind of your choice there. But my guess is that he would excuse you from that thing. And he might generally, anyway, just present those two things, the refuge and the Tara empowerment, separately, so that you have a chance to deal with that in a way that works for you.
I might just add that in India, Rinpoche gave like four empowerments, something like that. And he was pretty careful to not give practice commitments, since we're all, people are doing the Mahamudra program already. And so I think he's pretty sensitive to not adding practices, commitments with the empowerments that he gives the likes of us. So, which is, again, not a guarantee that there wouldn't be something, but I think that fairly...
It's good to be clear about it, that you raise that, rather than just be kind of lackadaisical about it, because you don't get the benefit if you don't do the practice. And if you receive a commitment and then you don't do that commitment, it's like sets a bad precedent in your mind stream. But I think, like Dora's saying, he's especially sensitive about all of that. And given that this community went to India so many times with Bokar Rinpoche, the issue of commitments became a big deal along the way. We talked a lot about them. And nobody wants to, neither Bokar Rinpoche nor Khenpo Rinpoche, when because nobody wants to put somebody in a bind where they take a commitment and then can't meet it. So I think it won't be a problem, and I think you should also just keep it in your mind, and so that you can go to him beforehand, presumably, and just say this is an issue, and I appreciate it.
It's likely that if it's not a more widespread issue, it should be. So I
Yeah.
think as opposed to recommending that we all deal with it individually,
Good point. Yeah.
we should just make an inquiry and say what the concern is, and then we can be clear at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, that approach also is almost guaranteed to get us from under an automatic commitment.
And we are going to be asking Rinpoche. I don't know if we don't know how this is going to come out, but we're going to be asking him for kind of a very short version of a Tara practice that people could do if they wanted to do something very short and didn't want to take on the longer version, but also didn't want to not do anything. So we're going to ask for that. But as I say, that hasn't been ironed out yet.
There's another aspect, which is I don't foresee myself doing Tara, but then part of my mind says, I don't know who I am in 3 years, and when might I again get a chance to get a Green Tara empowerment. So, so it's a big gray area of not wanting to honor the gift by doing the work, yeah, by doing the effort, yeah, and yet knowing things change, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the example of the last empowerment that Khenpo Rinpoche gave in India this year, where it was quite clear that it was not offered with the notion that any of us would be doing the practice. So it was very explicitly offered with a different kind of in a different way. It was offered to bring this piece of a particular piece of connection to the fore, and he offered the empowerment with that in mind. So that's it's not like that's unheard of, and so we all sitting there could take it all kind of being all clear about that. So that is one way that one spirit in which an empowerment is offered at times, or sometimes it may be an element of the panorama of the intention of the preceptor of the empowerment.
Could you say something about Green Tara? Like, I'm really interested in taking the empowerment because I feel like you do. Like, that might be something that I might want to do in the future, but I also feel kind of weird about getting the empowerment about something I have no...
Say that last thing again.
That
I just missed the last thing you said.
Oh, I would feel strange getting an empowerment for a practice that I know absolutely nothing about.
Yeah.
And I could read about it, but I could also just ask
Yeah.
you if you could say something. I mean, I guess the question would be like, why would, what in it, kind of in a nutshell sort of thing, like what would be beneficial about doing Green Tara? And what is it,
Yeah. Well, one way to deal with that is also that if there's not an explicit commitment made, there's likely to be a way to make a commitment. So I think you might call it kind of like in the Western style, a trial period that you might actually put there yourself. Like, for example, a certain smaller number of recitations of the mantra, along with the visualizations and the pieces that go with it. And that way you would find out something about it and whether or not you felt a connection to it and all. And so that's another possibility. So the issue of talking about Green Tara at this point, I feel a little bit not like doing that. Partly because he's coming, and I think that asking him to explain it is probably not even necessary. He's likely to explain it, but asking him to explain it is also helpful to assure that he will say something about it. And then you get it from his mouth, and I think that's actually even more important than reading it. Because it's about connection. I mean, maybe this is a good point to just mention that I think the entire Dharma is about connection, especially when you take into account what we just hold is a given truth of the interdependence of all things. So that's just to say there's the connections are without boundaries. They're so vast. And to meet Khenpo Rinpoche and hear him speak about it is probably more important from an experiential standpoint than the conceptual side of it. I say that personally, that's what it would be for me. Then you have something to go on that is a little experiential, a sense of like connecting with Khenpo Rinpoche, and that can carry you through things where you don't understand the practice or you don't feel like you're getting what you need to have. That connection can be more helpful than a conceptual understanding. So I don't want to compromise that with my words.
My first empowerment that I had was about 10 years ago, and I went to it. It was a Medicine Buddha empowerment, and I went there because I was painting a tanka for Medicine Buddha, and I wanted to kind of just have that as part of me painting my tanka. And when I was there, they did give a practice commitment. I think they recommended like doing the practice once a day or something like that. And if you couldn't do that, then doing the mantra 108 times every day. Well, anyways, that was 10 years ago, and I think I did pretty well the first couple of days. But I'm still painting the tanka, and so there's this sense of that I didn't know that there was going to be any practice commitment. That isn't even something that I had as a possibility in my head, because it was my first empowerment. I didn't really think of that. So I'm just trying to figure out how do I work with that now, because there is that in my head. I'm like, oh, he said I was supposed to be doing at least 108, and I haven't been doing that. So there's that kind of feeling in me, which, I was just wondering, how do you work with that now when it's been 10 years?
How do you work with the fact that you didn't keep the commitment? Is that what you're saying, in short?
Yeah, I guess that's in short, yeah.
Yeah. Well, again, there's a short term and there's a long term. And the long term is the only one that matters. So because we all do things that we need to notice that we didn't keep the commitment or we did something wrong and all, and then there's things in the practice itself that allow you to confess it and to deal with it in a certain way. And if it's something with any substance, any degree of substance, then it's helpful to go to the person, if you can, that you got the empowerment from. That's really helpful. If you intend especially to continue with that practice. So, is that your intent?
Well, I'm still doing this tanka painting, so I'm still doing a Tonka painting of the Medicine Buddha. So I still feel like there's this connection,
Yeah.
but, you know, so I still want to maintain that connection. I don't know if it's necessarily with the actual practice, if that makes sense.
But when did you take that empowerment?
About 2007.
2007? So from
Lama,
Lama Tsatsing?
hmm
So why don't you go see him? Is that possible?
Anything's possible.
Well, he's a nice guy.
Okay.
It's like he's not the sort of person who will scream at you and tell you to get out and leave. It's like that is just not the case.
Okay.
He's a very nice guy. I mean, I've had about 10 conversations with him in the last month. So I know he's very careful. He's very amenable to things, and I think that if you went to see him, he would appreciate that. And the reason he would appreciate it is you could just blow it off. Well, I didn't quite do it, so I'll just let it go. And in some way or another, most of us at one time or another do that. We just don't get to all the pieces of it, and then we just stop doing that practice. And that's actually, I won't say it's the worst, but it's really not good to just kind of leave it not done. It's better to repair it. And so if you go and see him, what he'll do is, his job then is to tell you how to repair it. And so you get two things. One, you get to see him again. And secondly, you get the instructions for how to repair that. And then you can repair it in a small way or a big way and gradually get yourself into it again. And since you're painting a Medicine Buddha Tonka, it's especially important. Especially important. So I would generally say that if you're going to paint a Tonka, you should have the empowerment, you should have the pieces there and engaging in that practice while you're painting it. So not too late, good to do that.
Okay. Thank you.
You could, if you can go and see him, I know he's going to be like incredibly busy now for the next period of time until the end of June, somewhere like that. But somewhere there, you could call him in advance and just say, if you ask me later, I could even give you his phone number. Does that work? Okay.
I just want to follow up with a question. I think the teachers are getting much clearer about our situation as Westerners. So like the remarks of, they don't say you got to do this every day for the rest of your life and it takes 2 hours.
Yeah.
But in the earlier days, a lot of people were in the situation you're in, which me too. Like you went to something because you felt sort of drawn. And at the end, someone said, now you have to do this 6 times a day for the rest of your life. And my question is, if you didn't know that and the whole thing was in Tibetan, did you really get that commitment? Do you know what I'm asking?
No.
Okay. Yes, you do. Do you want me to say it again? Repeat the question. No, I think it's very important because as the cultural gap was wider, they just came and gave these. And sometimes they were simple blessings. Sometimes they were a deeper level empowerment. None of that was explained. It was all in Tibetan. And then often someone who, maybe the translator, suddenly met with you and said, this is what happened to you. And I remember one time we were all sitting out in the hallway going, oh my God, what's the mantra? We have to say the mantra. What's the mantra? We don't have the mantra in front of us. We don't have anything written. And that dear person wrote out the mantra. So this happened over and over, and I suspect still is. So how does the student deal with that? And if you cannot see, you cannot easily go to that teacher, like they're back in India or wherever. What would you do?
If you couldn't go to the teacher and work this thing through?
Yeah.
Well, I think this really depends upon the person that you got the empowerment from. Like what Zopa is saying, we used to be far more, we expected to be more obligated to take on the practice with the attitude that normally just came with the Tibetan culture. And even without complete instructions, where you really didn't necessarily even know what you were doing, and yet you had a commitment still with some sense that, what do I do with this? I don't know what to do with it. Mm-hmm. And that was, I've known quite a few people who that was a real source of grief for, and even a couple of people who completely gave up the Dharma around it. So no teacher would be happy about that outcome. That's an awful outcome. So I think some kind of contact is really helpful. So it gets it off your mind. It's kind of like if you've hurt someone and you know they're holding a grudge against you, and you apologize and they feel better and everything kind of is better. You feel good, and you would recommend that to a friend. Like, that's how you deal with things. In a certain way, that's what this is. You received an empowerment. The empowerment is a gift. It's definitely considered a gift. And a gift in the sense that if you could imagine that 5 people wanted the empowerment, and the teacher gave the empowerment to everyone only after asking for some kind of evidence that they actually wanted it and intended to practice it and use it, so that they would be able to use it in order to benefit themselves and others. And then somebody didn't do it. So I think whatever remedies they used to use are no longer the remedies that are used so much anymore. There's a much, I think, deeper, not just phony understanding of the difference in the cultures, but an actual deeper understanding of it. When Khenpo Rinpoche was here last time, he said that he felt like he understood some of the differences that had been a problem in Westerners engaging in certain practices and not getting the right support or the right teachings or something not quite right there. That's a pretty big thing to have come across and just said. And Lama Tsatsing definitely is in that genre also. I mean, he's the guy who led the retreat that I was on, and we put him through a lot of misery. I suppose it should have been the other way around, but he tried really hard and it was fruitless from time to time. But those days are kind of in the rearview mirror at this point in many ways. It's generally easier to go and get somebody like Lama Tsatsing and just say, this is what happened. He'll laugh is what'll probably be the thing. Why did you not come sooner? So it's just, I think that it's fair to say that if you're going to say that you discovered that maybe you hadn't done this thing quite right and that you needed to do something, and he'll ask you what it is that you did or didn't do, and you do those things, and then you laugh about him a little bit, and then he says, so you really should do it this way. And then you should at that time, and I mean here should, really, not an accidental should, you should be able to say yes or I can't do it. So that's best in the very beginning, but often in the very beginning we don't get a chance because you're taking an empowerment with 20 other people, for example, and then somebody says like, and you should do at least 2,000 of these mantras every day, and who's going to stand up and say, oh, I can't do that? So then you go home and you realize like, wow, I got that commitment. I don't know what to do with that. So that's not the case in this situation. So when you see him, I'm going to just put the when you see him there, you can say that you talked with me even, and just say like, so I'm here, and he suggested I come, and he'll be very kind and all. And then it's very important, whether he makes anything out of it or not, that's your opportunity for it to be even better than it was before. And then you need to really honor that. It's important. But if you don't, you may lose some of the enthusiasm, and therefore some of the benefit, some of the sense of clarity and commitment to the practice may be lost, hard to get back, hard to get the confidence back once it's gone, and all of that. So thinking about all those pieces, then you make the commitment you can make. And I know that sometimes Lama Tsansing actually says, what do you think you can do? So I've known him not to even be willing to say what to do, but you tell me what you think you can do. And what you want to do is, you don't want to impress Lama Tsansing. You want to err kind of on the low side, because what's important is to be able to say, I did it. I fulfilled that commitment. Don't take on a 10-year commitment. Take on a 10-day commitment, a 10-week commitment, something that you feel like you can really do that. And then you can go back. And when you go back that time, you have a connection that's actually really precious. Same with Khenpo Rinpoche. I would say anyone you get that sort of thing, an empowerment from any teacher, it's so critical to have a relationship with that person. I say that from my own side, because in the beginning, we had great teachers give empowerments, but we did not always have a real relationship with them. They were just like, it's kind of like meeting the king of the universe. What do? You just sit there and wonder, what do you do? And then it's over, and then you don't do. And it's like, it doesn't work so well. You want to have a working relationship, even if you never work it, even if you never use it. You want to be able to at any time call and say, that empowerment, I did it, I did those things, and now I'm kind of interested in this empowerment. Then you'll get a special connection also. These are all normal things to us that we all do in our normal relationships with each other. But somehow, when we get out of our culture and into a practice that we don't understand, we somehow lose our footing on it somehow and think that it's somehow that we can't do it or there's something not quite right, when actually it really is kind of in the normal range of things. Does that make sense?
This is a question about.
Can you point the microphone to your mouth?
Yeah, here we go. That's better.
Great.
So this is just sort of a comment and a question about shamatha, Shine, based on this morning. I thought I would just bring up something that occurred to me. Kind of when you directed, as I understood it, a suggestion of kind of focusing on aversion or attraction of whatever was going on. At least that was part of what I understood you to say. I was experiencing this dull pain in the middle of my back, which is very familiar to me.
Familiar.
And so what I did differently than I usually do with that pain in my back was I focused on my own aversive reaction to it instead of just on the pain. And I found that it was very clarifying, and that it was felt like a very productive meditation, in that I felt like my focus was very strong on that pain. It was very easy to stay focused on it. And then I transferred that also to some itches and things in my face, and rather than scratch them, just sat with a feeling of aversion to them, and surprised when I thought about aversion how strong that feeling of aversion was. Anyway, so then what happened was the pain went away. And I found that as I was trying to focus on positive and negative reactions to everything going on, a lot of things I had, they were neutral. And then I found my mind started to wander more once that stimulus of the pain as a focus disappeared. So I'm just throwing this out as sort of an interesting experience, but wondering if you have any comments about that. I mean, one of the things that occurs to me that I have actually found at times useful is the helpfulness of adverse conditions in my life. And this was kind of an example of that. But it also made me wondering about what seemed like happened to my mind, the sort of maybe the boredom of the neutral. Which,
boredom is neutral, or what?
Well, instead, I wasn't identifying any particular adverse reactions or positive reactions to anything going on. Yeah. It was like, okay, this is happening, this is happening. So, do you have some comments or clarification about any of that?
It sounds right from what you said. Sometimes when you engage in a kind of a new practice like that, and it's feels an inspiration, that then the next thing is it doesn't work. That's pretty much my history in a nutshell. Today's inspiration is tomorrow's. I don't know what was so great yesterday. But it's also partly because over time, I would say that if we continue to work with those things, we find the way that it works. In other words, it's an issue of deeper familiarity. So we're really working with our own minds, whether it's in a shallow way or a deep way, an interesting way or a boring way. You know that famous teacher, Chogyam Trungpa, he used to talk about boredom a lot. He had like different categories of boredom, how important they were. Right. And because he was so good at talking about them, people worked a lot with boredom, and the boredom became interesting, which is not, of course, a statement about the boredom as if it was something separate from the meditator. It's something, when we make discoveries about our own mind, it invariably feels interesting, at the least. It has to be interesting. So I think what you're talking about is kind of on the money. And I would say that the reason why looking at something which is an active aversion and feeling interested in that or inspired by that, it's because normally we don't look at that. So it's like we're like maybe scanning the mind to see where we can put our mind that would be interesting, because of course we want to be interested, but we just skip over the stuff that looks hard, like the negative feeling or the argument that we had yesterday, or trying to in my own mind just work with it somehow. That doesn't look interesting. But that's where we should be actually really thinking like, wait a minute, there's something wrong when I'm looking at an aversion and thinking, nah, that doesn't look interesting. I mean, that should be a red flag there, because what you just said is actually just it's right. You put your awareness on any strong experience, whether it's physical, mental, even conceptual it can be. But underlying the conceptual is an experience. It's not just a concept, it's an experience. You contemplate a concept that's interesting and you have an experience. And the experience is where the energy is. It's where we can actually get something because we're into it. So if you have pain of some kind and you put your awareness on the pain and you just rest your awareness there, people routinely have the experience of the pain went away. And then it came back. And then it went away. So if we stay with that, at least we get the sense of the pain is not something independent from other things. It's connected to, if I put my awareness on it, the experience of the pain changes. If I put my awareness on it with the hope that the pain goes away, hard to say. It might get worse, it might get better. But at least when we have that sense of, it's strong sense of it, we have maybe, and we work with it in a way that you're just talking about, then we have a sense that this is fruitful.
I actually started really appreciating that pain because it was helping me focus, and then I was disappointed when it went away.
Well, we can fix that. Where's that ball peen hammer? Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So this question isn't super well formulated yet, but it's one I've been turning over in my mind since you talked about last week about interacting with the 3-year retreatants and about the responsibility that somebody who's a teacher has to their students. One of the things, so my day job is I'm a therapist, and I use a lot of general Dharma things in my practice as a therapist with the explicit communication that I'm not a teacher. And
I mean, you say that.
I say I'm not a meditation teacher.
Oh, I see.
If this is something you want to pursue further, I can help you find one. But things like basic mindfulness and meditation, loving kindness, I will often do with them in session. And your comment, what you said last week made me think about that. And should I be doing that? And can I do that? if I did integrate Dharma into my work with people, how do I do that skillfully?
Yeah, it's complicated, isn't it? It is for me, I can tell you that. Sometimes it is, just for this thing. It's helpful to know where you are with all of this. And it's like, I mean, you're sitting right in front here of some good examples. Like Bill and Dora and I have been teaching the Dharma, and Zopa teaches the Dharma. We don't give empowerments. So it's an interesting question to ask, why don't you give empowerments? And if we explored that, which we don't need to do now, but you discover why there's a reason why you don't give empowerments. And one of the reasons is the responsibility to the people that you're giving the empowerment to goes way up. And if you already feel like the level of responsibility is kind of like high, then smart people avoid jacking it up to a level which now it's like almost impossible to imagine that you can do it. And not only that, but the responsibility to the students also then has another thing. But what you're talking about sounds really just kind of in the genre of wholesome work. You know, the Dharma shouldn't be excluded from the rest of our life. Nobody would ever say that. Like, I love coming here and practicing loving kindness and compassion and all, but I don't do that when I'm outside of here. You know, I go and beat people up and yell at them and do all these other things because I don't have any instruction for those things. Nobody showed me how to do the nasty things, so I feel like I'm empowered to do it. I mean, just the confusion around all of that should say, no, this is not right. We are actually thinking, best case is we're interested in thoroughly imbuing the Dharma in our stream of consciousness in our minds. Thoroughly imbuing it, without exception. And the easiest pieces of that, of course, are things like those four immeasurables, the loving kindness and compassion and all. If someone doesn't have the interest in manifesting those things, then we need to start at a different place. But would we say this person isn't worthy of loving kindness and compassion, sense of joy and so on? We would never say that. So I think it's good to keep separate these pieces, the pieces that we easily understand. Doesn't mean that we're able to get people to practice them always, but we understand what they are. And to include those in your therapy work or whatever kind of work you do seems good, excellent, maybe. We have experienced some things along the way with individuals sometimes who do a very good job at one thing, and they end up mixing their understanding of the Dharma with that maybe is not so deep with some other thing in order to deepen the other thing, and there gets to be a confusion in there. Then they're not getting the result. They're not seeing the result in their pupils or their patients, whatever. And now they're having a hard time like kind of backing out of it or fixing the situation. And I think that's where sometimes we get a confusion. And I think specifically in the realm of therapy and the Dharma, I've seen that sometimes where the one becomes the other and they kind of mix together like, well, this is so good and I'm pretty good at this, must be good to mix the two together. Now, if you were a cook, that's how you would judge whether or not they're a good cook, by what they mixed together and gave you. And sometimes we draw the conclusion, not so good. You're undermining your ability as a therapist and getting confused about the Dharma too. So I think your question around that is totally apropos and something to watch and be clear about. It's not just for therapists. We all have to do that all the time. Be on guard for trying to fix ourselves by fixing somebody else. Just as one example. I'm unhappy all the time, and so I try to make somebody else happy by means that actually don't lead to their happiness, perhaps, but I hoped that it would, and then when it doesn't, I feel unhappy, and then I tend to blame them for their unhappiness, which makes me unhappy for failing. And it just kind of like twirls around. I mean, don't we all have that experience in some way or another? It's just normal human relationships. But what we would like to do with the Dharma is present a very clear understanding of, let's just say, for starters, something small, like the ability to hold the wish that confusion would be utterly gone for everyone. And if I could do that for every being, whatever was necessary for them to be free of that confusion, I wish that I could deliver that. Totally, that's a totally fine aspiration. I look through that, I can't find any confusion at all. But if I find something that I think would fix their confusion, now the first thing I have to be is suspicious. So it does get, if you want it to be simple, you should go fishing. Yeah, I think even when many of us were going annually, and some still do go annually, to see people like Bokar Rinpoche and Khenpo Rinpoche, even then we see, talking to them, publicly and privately, they will say, "Oh, this is really difficult. We're having a difficulty with this situation." Like we had early on, Bokar Rinpoche used to ask us to take on a certain level of commitment. And because being with him was so exciting and so inspiring, it's like you just felt like, whatever the commitment is, I'm taking it. It's almost like the confidence was there, but the underpinning of the confidence was not quite there yet. And so sometimes people would fail at what they intended to do and what they committed to do. And after they failed, they would just utterly stop practicing the Dharma entirely and just disappear. And it didn't take but one or two times around, and pretty soon our teachers were looking at that and saying, "Whoa, we got to do something here. This is not working." So I think we all have that situation in some way or another. We try to be helpful, and then we find, whoa, this is not working. So we need to do something. It's not that the great practitioners always get this right, nor is it the case that those who are kind of new at it can't be helpful. They can be helpful.
Thank you.
One thing I think that bears reiteration in the midst of all the things, be careful about what you're putting together, and being able to say, this is, I understand this much about how to present mindfulness. I understand this much about how to present cultivation of loving kindness, whatever it is, and just leave those as they are. Where it becomes actually, where I've noticed that it becomes kind of like red flag territory, is when people go, "Oh, it's all the same thing." And sort of, then it all becomes all mushed up. And then if you kind of lose track of these are the methods that I learned from this source, and these are the methods that I learned here, and I know where I am in understanding this, and I know where I am in understanding that one. That allows for space for your own growth, and for it to be helpful to others. So it's just kind of a matter of staying simple and having enough sense of kind of the horizons that I'm still working on this, and this is what I understand, and it's been helpful, and I can share that much.
So I'm kind of wondering about the all the shoulds and the shouldn'ts,
Yeah.
and the rights and the wrongs and the success and the failure and all the distinctions that come through about that. It seems like it's a little bit of a setup, psychologically speaking, if I can dare that, to say that. So I've been working with that. I'm not a very consistent practitioner, and I haven't been a very consistent practitioner. I've been consistently inconsistent. And I used to struggle with that, like, that needs to change, That's something. Now I'm kind of with, that's okay. It's all ultimately.
It's all what?
Ultimately inseparable from mind. Ultimately, as a concept, but as an experience, it seems to be, for me, more helpful for me to see these things very closely, to see them, to be with them, to watch my reaction to them, to work with them, to kind of accept things as they are, as a way of moving toward any kind of change, and that's certainly something that comes through for me in working as a therapist. Is it's no shoulds or shouldn'ts, or you're broken, you're fixed, or you need, or you don't need, or any of that. It's more just an experience of connection and noticing without any of that judgment. So I don't know if that sounds like combining things when it shouldn't be combined, or a recipe that's got, I don't know. But experientially, to me, that the experience of being with that experience feels helpful.
Which experience?
Of noticing, and noticing in connection, within the experience of connection.
Simple.
Simple.
Yeah.
Simple.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. I think that's what we deal with all the time. In whether it's therapy or Dharma, there's always a little bit of an issue about how do you get yourself to engage in something that will be helpful, for oneself and to stay with it when on any given weekend it doesn't appear to be helpful. So how do you stay with it or skip that weekend, or what other thing might work without setting yourself back by self-talk and all the things that go with it? I think those issues exist in therapy, of course. They exist in practicing the Dharma. They exist in teaching the Dharma and listening to the Dharma and practicing it. You get a practice. I certainly have received instructions for practices that as soon as the practice was over and the teacher got up and left, I'm wondering, what the hell was that? I don't know what that, do you know what? No, really? So how are we going to do that? It's gone. And so now you're sitting there with a commitment, in this particular case that I'm recalling, and actually no real way to do it. Like add sugar, but all you have is salt. Well, they're both white. Maybe it doesn't matter. So I think we deal with that all the time. As human beings, I think we do. When we make a commitment, we want to make the commitment, we want to keep the commitment, and then we find that we can't keep the commitment, and then we feel like we're not worthy of the commitment, what to speak of the result of keeping the commitment, and all these things start coming around. And they, if not dealt with carefully, they often end in some significant personal harm. That's my experience within the context of the Dharma. So I think it's within the context of being a human being with other humans, is that those things happen. And it really doesn't, in one sense, matter as much about whether we're the most skillful person or not, but maybe more important is how much we care. Because we all seem to respond to that. What do you think?
Yes. Yes. And, I'm thinking I don't want to turn my vices into virtues at all,
Why not?
Well, I guess I don't want to go in either direction, So this is just where I'm kind of thinking at this time.
Yeah.
But I'm not holding it as saying, I've made some discovery, but there's a process here, and I appreciate your feedback.
I'm magnetized by your comment. I don't want to turn my vices into virtues, and I'm thinking to myself, well, hell, what have I been doing wrong? That's because in a certain way, just like I don't know your name, Doug? Yeah, yes. Okay, what you were saying, I'm just suddenly recalling that piece. I think what I'm a little facetious about what you just said. Just to clarify, I think what we would most like to have is just virtues. Even the things that other people call vices, I wish they'd call them virtues. It'd make me feel better. And what I would like to do is take the energy of the vice and my relationship with it and work with it in such a way that by virtue of seeing clearly what's there, I have insight into something that I didn't have insight into before. So that's what I think of when I think of turning vices into virtues. Because there's nothing really there. There's no thing there that we can say, this is a vice and this is a virtue. Well, it has to be. It comes off a tree in India, so it must be a virtue. I mean, we get confused like that. So, and I feel like I've got tons of vices, too many to work on in this life, so I keep shoving them into drawers and thinking, next life, And then at certain times I feel like, who cares? Let's just do the vices. But when I'm practicing, I see the vices. I see the things that are not in accordance with the Dharma, because mostly the things that I see in the Dharma, maybe 100% even, I feel like that's good. I'm happy to possess that habit or that approach to things. But then there's all these other things. So if I put my awareness on my reaction to what I might call a negative emotion, and when I put my attention on that negative emotion, it usually has a context, like something happened, and so there's a context for it. And the context is there, and my first thought is, I don't want to look at that. I don't have time. I have to be somewhere. I don't have time to look at it. But if I have the time and I'm looking at it, that thing which I would say is a vice is actually the most helpful thing that I could have. Because nothing has more energy than that. When I go to look at it, it's really magnetizing. Especially if I go into it from the perspective of, I know that I really want to work on this. It's kind of like there's a monster in the basement, and I really want to go down and see that monster, but I'm afraid it's going to eat me. And so I have to figure out how I can go and see it without it eating me somehow. So I put my awareness on the experience of that thing I would call not so good, a vice, let's say. I put my awareness not on the vice, but on the experience. The experience is magnetizing, because there's nothing more that we identify with than our experience. I can say, I'm not bad. I don't identify with being bad. And that's totally true. But do I ever regret having done something? Every day. So in the moment of putting my awareness on that experience as it is occurring, I see what it is. And most of the time, there's nothing needs to be done. It's done. And there's often some little movement of energy and things around it, and the confusion coming and going a little bit, and then pretty soon it's kind of like the wind dies down and the water's smooth, and it's like it's just gone. And the big mind knows that's what we mean by emptiness. When we talk about emptiness, that's what we mean about emptiness. You did it, you worked on it, you looked at it, you went around it, you looked at all the pieces, you enjoyed it, you hated it, all of that, and then suddenly it's just gone. Is that okay? Thank you.
This is just a comment, I think, but this dialogue, it just kind of had a light bulb in my head, and so I wanted to share.
That hurt?
It was really bright. No, but I was thinking about, my work and addictions as a therapist, and boy, that is, and for my own personal life, that vice, so in this example, vice would be addiction to drugs or alcohol, right? And folks come in, and that's what the problem is, right? But that ends up opening this gate of like, what is this empty void or this wound or this, all this like hunger that I have, like, it's just like, it's the thing that often gets people even looking, at their experience and their mind. I mean, that's how it was for me. I mean, I think that's why I found the Dharma. So I don't know. I just wanted to share that because it just kind of like popped in my head about that how of the vice, the pain in the back or whatever can really be a gateway to opening a door of awareness in that way. That I've seen that, and then the other thing too is just about when you're talking about consistency, and I see this with my own battle with my commitments to Mahamudra program and Nundro and all of this, and that feeling of guilt or whatever it is, like unfinished business because I'm not, doing it and stuff. And also thinking about like my clients who come back sometimes and say, oh, I drank alcohol, and they're so ashamed and they don't want to and sometimes they don't come back. I mean, sometimes that shame is done. Like they just, so those parallels are just popping in my head and thinking about how, even if have been inconsistent to my commitments, just like to being sober or something, but my commitment to the Dharma, to doing my Mahamudra program, the worst thing that I could do would be to just feel like I'm not worthy of picking it up again, right? So I don't know. I don't really have a question. I just wanted to say that.
Who else is not worthy?
What'd you say?
Who else is not worthy? Do you know anyone else other than yourself?
Everybody's worthy, yeah.
Well, what happened to Marcy?
Well, no, I mean, I think I am, but I just, it's just something that's, it's easy, I think, for us to fall into that trap,
Yeah. So what do you do? How do you get around it?
Well, I mean, what I've been doing, although this conversation has made me want to make another appointment with you, but to clarify, but what I've been doing is just saying, okay, I'll practice, just rejoicing when I do do it. I don't do it the way I'm supposed to be doing it right now.
What's that?
A certain number per year, the whole Nundro thing, right?
Oh, I see.
But I do the practices, and then I try to rejoice in that. I try to just...
You try to rejoice.
Well, I do.
You do rejoice.
But I have to make the intention to not see it as it's not...
Yes.
I guess what I'm saying is it's become something that I don't... It's not because I have to do it. I'm doing it because I want to do it. I'm just not doing it like I'm supposed to be doing it. But when I do it, it's because I want to do it. And that feels better.
We do things all the time for reasons other than what we started out thinking would be the reason, right? And then sometimes we like what we're doing and sometimes we don't like. I mean, that's just kind of being a human being is like that. If your intention is, if your attention is focused on the bodhicitta aspect, for example, and you carry that a lot during the day, which is, I think, it's almost a necessity in order to kind of soak in it. You have to kind of be in it more, as much as you possibly can. So you develop the habit, the strong habit, if possible, of giving rise to that wish to benefit all beings. So that it's there. So then it becomes more and more difficult to challenge your own worthiness at any level. Because of two things. One is you can say with some confidence that there's no such thing as another being who's not worthy of this loving kindness and caring and so on. But then you have to see I should be even more worthy of it, in the sense that my intention is to benefit all sentient beings. So I should have a sense of this loving kindness and caring, etc. Because if I don't have that, how do I touch others with it? When we meet our great practitioners, whether they're teachers or not, we meet great practitioners, and they are our teachers, because we witness that loving kindness and caring and insight, and just being with them feels helpful and all. Of course, we want to do that. We have to do it also for ourselves, because it's kind of like the flashlight. If you don't have batteries, it doesn't light. So the batteries are like this sense that I'm worthy of it more than for any other reason. I'm worthy of it because my intention is this bodhicitta. So it keeps the light on in a certain way. You can fail as long as you don't lose that intention. Then it's not a failure. Then it's just a part of the process that's unfolding. That's my experience of it anyway. I mean, I think these things all take time. Again, like we were talking about earlier, whether it's in the Dharma, whether it's therapy, whether it's some other thing, whether you're a Sufi or a Muslim or whatever it is, the intention has to be focused as much as possible. You know, if you can intentionally give rise to it 10 times a day, that's enormous in comparison to just kind of holding the conceptual view of bodhicitta. Trying to meet people during the day when you see them and holding that view and giving rise to it. Like if you meet a client or a patient, and the moment you see them, you can remember and you give rise to bodhicitta, it affects what follows. So the more times you do it, the more it affects what follows, and the more it affects you, which makes it easier to raise it, and it follows. And I think those are really important for us as beginners, and I include myself in that place. The more I do it, the more I can see that it goes out. It doesn't just stay in here. It's not magic. We all know that. That's just ordinary. The way of relating. It's our interdependence with all beings, all phenomena, everything. I think when we notice it and we see it, we're plenty skillful enough to know its value and to know how important it is. So like, you gotta just keep raising it.
As I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about kind of this a frame of this experience of holding the intention as something, just the intention is this container.
Yeah.
And then within this container of this intention, when I was listening to you talk about people fall off the wagon or they fall off the horse, and then they can't even want to show up to get back on the horse. It's too much. And the notion of the consistent inconsistency. Also, holding this umbrella of this intention, then the commitment in a certain way is that we are continually going to get on the horse. It's not that we were on the horse and then we fell off the horse and then we got on the horse and then we fell off of it. It's a commitment to continually get on the horse, to show up whenever we can. So when you meet somebody, there's an opportunity. Every time there's an opportunity. So to focus more on that than on the, oh, I didn't do it.
Yeah.
The didn't do it part is, then I'm reminded of the traditional teaching of, I've forgotten which teacher it was, talked about their vows. Perhaps it was Atisha talking about, well, my monk's vows, I managed to
Oh, yeah.
I never missed a beat.
Yeah.
Like 100%, no problem. The Bodhisattva vow, well, that was, well, it was kind of a challenge, but I was pretty good, and I never really let it go. But because I could always kind of spot it, and after pretty shortly, I could repair it in my mind. The Vajrayana vow, that was like you start to wipe the mirror, and by the time you've got to the one side of the mirror, the other side's already dusty again. And so to be able to practice, that one that sounds really discouraging. And it would be discouraging if our attitude was, look at all that failure, as opposed to this notion, I continually wipe the mirror. I continually get back on the horse of bodhicitta. I continually get on the horse. So the moving ahead and the container that's created by that intention, as you were talking about it, it's like this fundamentally positive place. And then it launches all the things that come after it. A different flavor.
Thanks, Bill. That's good. I was thinking it's helpful to get down in the trenches like this. Down in the trenches. But then we also have to be able to see up through the cracks and see the sky. So I think by the end before we leave today, we should recite the Mahamudra aspiration prayer as the antidote to all things.
I don't want to hog the microphone, but nobody said anything, so I just had I wanted to ask Lama Michael for possibly a bit of an expansion on one of your instructions this morning. You talked about seeing all the people all sentient beings.
Oh, yeah.
And also, I think your words were kind of imagining them drawn to you and attracted. I can't quite remember the words, but it was intriguing, and I hadn't heard that instruction, and I wondered if you might just talk about that part of the instruction more fully.
All right. Yeah, that piece actually often befuddles us, and I don't know whether it's just my age or what, but I think that it should be actually really simple, because we do this with everything we see. With everything we see, we add meaning to it. I mean, I see this microphone here, and I add meaning to it instantly, without thinking, right? I walk into here, I look around, I add meaning immediately. It changes every time I walk in. So we all have relationships with other human beings. And I think most people would say those relationships play a significant role in my life. Not always pleasant, often very pleasant, and everything in between. And so what we do is here, because bodhicitta is so important, and you know that term, I'm assuming, okay, then what we want to do when we begin the practice is we want to imagine all of those beings for whom we wish could be free of suffering and its causes. How many beings is that? It's uncountable. It's everyone who was ever your mother, ever. It's everyone who will be your mother in the future. And the point of that is not that we are challenging something that looks like a ridiculous proposition, but rather that we intend to hold that view of all sentient beings. Not that they were just our mother, but if we could imagine the kindest mother possible, every one of them has been our mother. So we go into it with that perspective, and over time, it naturally kind of boils to the surface, and we feel that sense with other beings. And then the bodhicitta is much easier. So we visualize those sentient beings, unlimited in number, like not just an enormous number, uncountable, not in the sense that, well, if you had a fast enough computer, you could count them. But it's literally beyond infinity. It's like just uncountable. They fill all of space. And we make the wish and the aspiration to benefit all of them. And it's a very important piece of the practice. Go ahead.
I actually had heard that part of it before.
Well, what else do you know?
But I was wondering about the being drawn to
Yeah.
you and attracted to you for relief, or something like that. That aspect of
It's
it.
magnetized. You used the word magnetized.
Oh,
Once we have that bodhicitta,
yeah.
then they become magnetized.
Yeah.
Right,
It goes
like-
both ways, really, doesn't
Kind
it?
of like to all come start.
Yeah.
He wants you to talk about how the magnetizing works.
Really?
Why would they be magnetized or how?
Right. Well, you kind of talk like imagining all these limitless sentient beings being drawn to you, and
Because of previous connection, not because they love me or they like me or I look good or something. It's because that's the nature of interconnectedness. Is that we are drawn to our friends like we're drawn to our enemies, with different intentions and motivations and all, but we are drawn to things. So what we're trying to do is just add this meaning to our experience, which we're going to do anyway. Like I said, we walk in here, we immediately add meaning to the experience of this room. If there's people in it, we add different meaning. If somebody's missing that we thought was here, we add different meaning. We're continually adding meaning to our experience, day and night, all the time. So the Dharma is a lot about, okay, so since that's the case, let's add the meaning we want to add and work with it just from that place. And from that place, we easily step into the bodhicitta. It's a snap. I was going to say, no, it's not. Right? It's easier when we imagine that we're surrounded by the very people that we're aspiring bodhicitta with. And I think it's important to notice, and occasionally mention it again, that on the surface of the practice of bodhicitta, ostensibly it looks like we are practicing strictly 100% for the benefit of others. Our own benefit, well, it'll take care of itself. However, when we look at it closer, not even with an altruistic point of view, we see that you cannot accomplish your own benefit without the aspiration to benefit all sentient beings. It's not possible. Even if we look at our own lives, we'll see that the points of greatest happiness in our own life was when we were benefiting somebody else. Now, I don't know, there may be some exceptions along that, certain kinds of sociopaths and other things, but I'm not even sure in that case.
all right. It was
surrender.
just that there was and I think it sounds like maybe this just goes without saying, but it's almost like you had also included imagining a positive response to our radiation of bodhicitta on the part of other people as part of doing it. And that's the part that was intriguing to me, which I hadn't really...
That's there too. Well, I mean, part of it is imagining that our intention is bearing fruit. And so there is something positive that's happening. And there's no necessity, I've never heard there was a necessity to, I don't know if I want to go down this path. I think we can each discover this in our own histories and experience, that when we really do hold that view, we personally feel like that's the best thing that I can do with my life. Because when I hold that view, I act from that view. When I really hold it. If I just hold it up, kind of like putting sunglasses on, then I take them off and then it's too shiny outside. Then I have to put them back on again, everything I'm doing. That's not the view. This is the view is you put the view on and it just functions from there. Which is to say, we hold the view that we would do anything to eradicate suffering and its causes.
Thank you.
It's so easy to do that and feel like a phony. Feel like I can't really do this. I can barely even think about all sentient beings being here, let alone imagine them being here, let alone see them and all of that. And especially my evil uncle or whatever. I don't have an evil uncle, so I feel okay about saying that. But that's what we do all the time. We constantly impose our own vision. We might say our own vision on reality, but the truth is that's not what we feel or experience. What we experience is that is the reality. What I experience is the reality. If you don't experience what I experience, there's something wrong with you. That's our norm, isn't it? If I'm really big-minded, I can admit that your experience is not in accordance with my experience, but yours is at least as good as mine. But mostly that's not where we go. No, you got a problem. We're trying to open like as big as we can possibly get with it. Well, shall we surrender?
By this virtue may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in the state. We have 2 hours left, right? 3 hours left.
8.
Yeah.